Welcome to the afternoon constitutional. Our theme song apparently is out with the writers' strike right now, compensating for something. We'll be back tomorrow in our episode, but for some reason wasn't there for you. Joining us today to blow up some of the climate myths, because as the president and the king have been meeting to discuss climate finance, which I thought was an interesting turn of a phrase, because our friend Chris Horner, also with GovOversight, govoversight.org right here, is 4 best-selling books into exposing the fact that climate change is nothing more than a Ponzi scheme designed to take your money and give it to somebody you probably wouldn't have given it to otherwise if you had said, hey, the thing you're trying to sell me, does it pencil out? Does it work? And so the president and the king are meeting about climate finances, and that finance means how much money is this going to make for people who haven't earned it themselves in lieu of, like, I don't know, inventing something that actually costs less. And that's the issue, I think, with most of the people who argue with climate change in the United States, is that we have to be clear. If somebody came along and said, hey, I've got something that's cheaper and more readily available than fossil fuels, we'd change to it, just like we did when we changed to fossil fuels. There's a reason it's called natural gas, because what we had been using was wood gas before that, which was manufactured gas. So when they came along with natural gas, they said, wow, this is easier than burning a piece of wood and then suffocating it and catching the gas. And it cost a lot less to just let the natural gas come out of the ground, capture it, put it in a tank, and let you light your streets with it. By the way, I see Julia Roberts is starring in some, I think, direct-to-cable movie called Gaslit. It's about time somebody did a Gaslit. We have enough stories about it going around. So we put together a show, and we're hoping to get with Steve Milloy from junkscience.org. He's our first guest to blow up the whole idea of climate finances. And you want the climate finances because, boy, you know, as I said, if they came along with something that was less expensive to manufacture, less climate harming, that's fine, throw that in there too. But at the end of the day, it's got to pencil out, and a hybrid car does not. The disposals, we haven't even factored in the disposal costs of the batteries and the solar cells. Never mind whatever we can do with the carbon fiber wind turbines when they go poof in the night. And if you've ever seen the video of one of these wind turbines failing, they don't fail gently. They just don't all of a sudden stop working. But it was Steve Milloy with Junk Science has written quite a bit about this scam. And then we've got Larry Behrens, who's got a new book out called Sabotage and the administration's efforts against fossil fuels. And partially it's because they have to. You cannot expect a government to stand by idly and allow this opportunity to make money for its patrons to go by the wayside. As Chris Horner, author of Red Hot Lies, Power Grab, Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming, etc., is off to say, when you're taxing Peter to pay Paul, you have Paul's unwavering support. And you do. And at some point, Peter says, well, I can't afford this anymore, so you start taxing somebody else to pay Peter and Paul. Ostensibly, in our current setup, Peter and Paul's grandkids will eventually pay for the hamburgers that they're having today. But all the food shortages, 40%, USDA reported 40% of tillable fields in the United States were plowed under because the crops failed. because of a lack of fertilizer. See, the USDA hopes that you don't stop and say, hold it. Fertilizer's made from natural gas. It's one of the key ingredients in it. See, when they clamped down on natural gas, everyone I'm associated with said, but what about the fertilizer? And they said, no. By the way, COVID shots. See, we've got COVID shots. And we said, but what about the fertilizer? No. Over here, we've got Dr. Fauci is talking. You should pay attention to him. And now here we are. A failure of crops due to a shortage of fertilizer made by natural gas. And that's just one of the unintended consequences, or perhaps intended. Remember, this all begins with Paul Ehrlich's population bomb. When Paul Ehrlich wrote the population bomb, he said, oh my goodness, the earth, 20 years, too many people, we're all going to starve to death, famine. Then we came up with dwarf wheat, and that went away. But Paul Ehrlich said, so he's continued and does continue the cult of too many people. And that really is, sadly, what's at the base of the climate movement. The climate movement is a population control movement. And you know this because one of the number one polluters of the air in our country and on the planet are human beings. They don't say it at parties because it sounds mean. And they don't mean you per se. They mean the other human beings, the ones that don't do as much as you do. You're important to our society. We've decided these other people, not so much. Yet there they are, huffing and puffing, breathing out carbon dioxide at a breakneck pace. Then they go and have children. Can we stop that at least? Can we get some sort of shot that sterilizes these kids so that they stop having more kids? My God, they're like cats. That's not me speaking. That's the behavior of the Gates Foundation and some of the folks who go to sub-Saharan Africa and say, yes. Meanwhile, having enough kids to work what meager farming areas you have is often the only way you can survive. But who are we to quibble about somebody else's society when we feel like they're lesser than ours? It's funny, this isn't the first time the Caucasian race has gone into Africa. And it always seems to be the same political group that comes in and says, you guys, you're like savages. Let's help you. You're having too many kids to begin with. But we've got a vaccine for that. No. We have a vaccine for all the other diseases that are running around. It might just render you barren. But that's okay. We got lots of kids. We got too many kids. You may agree with that. But who gets to decide that? Who gets to decide whose children lives and dies? Do you? There are a lot of people in a lot of government offices that believe they do. And they march out under the banner of Paul Ehrlich's population bomb. And don't kid yourself. That is what is at the center square of all of this. So, while the president and the king are meeting in England to discuss the money that can be transferred to other people for right think in the climate scam, the climate shell game, you and I sit here trying to figure out why my electric bill went up 7% or 10%, why gasoline is still $3.64 a gallon in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and it went up over what it had gone up to the last time. So I don't know if you understand the nuance, the difference between saying we don't want dirty rivers and we want climate change legislation, because there's a profound difference. There's quite a few miles of difference between part one and part two. See, they want you to believe that that anyone who denies climate science wants dirty air and dirty water and dying children and pestilence. They basically want the Ganges River to replace the James River, which we know isn't true, but it makes for good copy. It makes for good rhetoric when the blue hairs light their hair on fire. Because you can't have a reasonable conversation about this. Chris Horner's tried. Again, govoversight.org, right here. Support his work. Govoversight.org. Lord knows we tried. And that's how FOIA became our favorite four-letter word, was tracking down people like Lisa Jackson, who, as the head of the EPA, was using a Gmail account under the name Richard Windsor to conduct meetings with people from Greenpeace and other, the Nature Conservancy and places, green agenda organizations, saying, well, how should we craft this policy? Remember the hue and cry when it became clear that President Biden's policy regarding masks in schools had not just been advised by, but had been written by Randy Weingarten of the Teachers Union? Yeah, think that, only with a lot more money attached to it. That was the climate agenda. As was purported. This was about a massive transference of wealth from one group to another, a permanent poverty class, even more of a entrenched oligarchy of people who had lots of money to begin with, were given more by the government to do right think, to do right business. And then once you have, and understand that a free market has to be fluid. There has to be movement, just like in any other fluid. You can't have all the people climbing up without some people climbing down. You need wealthy people to become poor so that poor people can become wealthy. And that's a very crass kind of generalization of how it works. But when the federal government starts stepping in and helping people not just become wealthy, but stay wealthy because they're doing right business, because they've engaged in right think, now you've frozen large segments of the upper class without ever having to concern their pretty little heads that they're going to lose all the money. So what does that have to mean in science? Not the science is settled science. I mean, in real political science, that means the poor can't rise up because the middle can't rise up because the top is frozen. The top has been now protected. So now all you can do is battle for a better place in the middle. And then the statists come in and they say, and the danger is sometimes you call people out. Donald J. Trump went into Detroit and said, hey, how's this working out for you? And people on the left went, uh-oh. Folks like Kim Klacik started running for office in Baltimore saying, look at this place. This political party's been running this joint for 40 years. And they had to come up with an answer. The answer was white supremacy. Because white supremacy meant good-hearted, well-meaning Democratic mayors and city councilors and governors like Nancy Pelosi's dad didn't mean to help his cronies get rich and happy and fat and wealthy. No, it was white supremacy that did that. It was white supremacy, perhaps of Nancy Pelosi's dad or others like him, who through the years protected their friends at the expense of others. So, sorry, thanks for playing. And ever since 1964 and the beginning of the Great Society, we've had this issue. We've had an issue where the poor can't stop being poor because the rich won't stop being rich because they're protected. Because they're protected because they had, at the time, enough money. Now, understand, several things happen in conjunction economically. Great Society was started. Lyndon Johnson started sending money to the poor community under the banner, please stop rioting and burning stuff. Please go back to work, or at least just stop burning stuff. Then come 1972, 8 years later, there's a problem. The problem is we only have so many dollars because we only have so much gold and silver. And we can only print dollars for all the gold and silver that we have. And then we're not getting any more gold and silver, so we're kind of in a bind. So the Congress comes up with a plan to say, well, we don't need gold and silver anymore. We're the number one, we're the reserve currency. Everybody trades with dollars. So we will invent a new currency called the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. And they created this currency, and all of a sudden, it didn't matter how much gold or silver we had. We could just print more money. And since then, inflation has been so bad that a middle-class worker in 1965 or even 1970 could afford to save up and buy himself a home and put their kids through college. Just 10 years later, the student loan industry was exploding. HMOs were coming in saying, we'll help you pay for your health care costs. Why? Because the value of the dollar went into a ditch, flipped over twice, and burst into flames like it was a car in a Stephen J. Cannell TV show. That's why the climate movement has to keep this pyramid working for those who have bought into it. The companies that have invested all their time and treasure into making these very expensive batteries, these very expensive solar cells. And so while they're making these very expensive solar cells, ignoring what has to happen when you have to get rid of them, they still need to send money to their shareholders. That's where DEI and ESG investing scams came in, because then you no longer, just like we did in 1972, you invent a new currency. So Barack Obama tried to invent this new currency. It was called the climate credit, where you, if you were clean, would earn climate credits, like you were in a video game and you were collecting gold coins. And you could sell those to filthy, dirty polluters. Well, that didn't work. People caught on. They're like, hang on a second here. Then that's not actually cleaning up the environment, which is what you told us we were doing. So they kind of scuttled away from that. They came back with a new one. It's called ESG investing. Now, that's the new currency. That's better than crypto, because all it is an acronym: environmental social governance, environmental and social governance, ESG, which means your company has value just because you say these are the things we're doing. We're not giving money to the Government Accountability and Oversight. We're giving it to Greenpeace. Oh, ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. You've got more value on your stock because you have ESG. You have a high ESG score. No, it's not the same as getting a high PSI score, although economically speaking, it's an awful lot like prostate cancer. It's going to kill you, and it's a pain in the ass to find out about it. But that's where we are. So that's why the president and the king, now the king has been a climate devotee since Al Gore. And it was kind of fun because the king was about to, go through his life getting just as close to actual authority over anything as Al Gore was. And then his mom up and passes away, and he actually becomes King of England. And I'm not the only person who wants common sense, clean rivers, and well-maintained forests, who wonders if the king isn't going to start hanging people from the Tower of London and guillotining folks, drawing them and quartering like the enemies of the king used to do back in the good old days when the king could get what he wanted. It was good to be the king. So the king is meeting with the president to discuss climate finances. How much money can we traffic into the pockets of people who haven't earned it or have made something that if they actually put the price tag on it minus government subsidy, no one, and I mean no one, would ever buy it. Because it's like, wow, here's a $120,000 car. It's a four-door sedan. It looks like a Honda Accord. There's not wrong with Honda Accords, but it's not a $120,000 or $140,000 vehicle. Yes, but it's electric. Okay, how long does it last? About 4 or 5 years. And what happens then? You throw it away. Hold on a second here. I thought we were supposed to be for the climate. Well, we are. Right now, we're for the climate. I'm not going to be in charge in 4 or 5 years when some poor other schmuck is going to have to figure out what to do with all of these batteries. I forget the name of the mountain we bury all of our nuclear waste in. And that's another thing we do badly under the auspices of government incursion. We've discussed that on this program. Nuclear energy is done ridiculously badly here. The French make us look like a 5th grade science class when it comes to nuclear energy. But there we sit. Wind turbine in our hands. Mother Nature standing in the room saying, "What are you doing with that thing in your hand? Oh my God." What? What do you think I was alluding to? It's all a scam, and it doesn't help the climate at all. Yet they've told us that we've just experienced the 2 hottest days on the planet Earth. And our first guest, Steve Milloy, who was not able to join us. Let me read to you his piece on this, because he wrote a wonderful piece on the bunkum that is the 2 hottest days ever. I will do my best with his words before Larry Behrens joins us. And let's see if I can go back to his original column. Wall Street Journal, by the way, not some QAnon rag that Denver Riggleman can dismiss. Steve Milloy, E&E legal fellow and former Trump EVA transition team member, along with our friend Chris Horner. Average global temperature is a meaningless measure, and comparisons to 125,000 years ago preposterous. Average global temperature is a concept invented for and by the global warming hypothesis. It is more of a political concept than a scientific one. Quote, "It has been estimated that 96% of the U.S. temperature stations produce corrupted data. 92% of them reportedly have a margin of error of 1 full degree Celsius or nearly 2 degrees Fahrenheit. The lack of precision reporting measures, whether estimated or measured, is not reassuring. And of course, that therein was something we found in the early science of Michael Mann, who, like the cavemen before him, sketched little stick figures on the side of the cave he was working in and said, look, it's a hockey stick. Look at how much warmer it got right here at the end. And it was all based on data where he had left out large portions of the collected temperature data, because if he had included all of that temperature data, the hockey stick is a straight line. And it doesn't look nearly as sexy in Al Gore's movie. But that's okay. They came back, and they've come up with new things. And now the king and the president are going to talk about, how much natural gas is going to be damaged with cluster bombs, and how fighting for Ukraine is an environmental disaster, and all the things that John Kerry goes around on his Learjet to tell us all about. So joining us now to talk about his new book, it's called Sabotage, is Larry Behrens. And Larry, on this day when the king and the president have gotten together and are divvying up the climate spoils, the climate finance, as President Biden's chief spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre called it. This is important to talk about why they broke this. How are you doing this afternoon? I'm sorry, what was that?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm sorry, we just didn't have you turned on there for a second. Anyway.
Okay. Sorry. I thought it was something on my end. I'm always messing something up. It's so great to talk with you.
Well, thank you. We appreciate it as well. So talk about, what is going on right now. The king has been about as environmentally active as Al Gore, and luckily up until earlier this year, just as far away from power as Al Gore ever got. But now he's got actual power. What does King Charles mean to the climate zealots, the ones who want us to buy toxic waste dumps to drive around in them for 5 years until we have to dump them out? They want to put cobalt on our roofs until we have to find out a way to get rid of that, and all the time mining it with Chinese child labor and African child labor. Larry, what is the king's role in this? Because I feel like he's going to be the seminal player, or at least he looks like he's there scolding the president on all of these different agendas.
Yeah, he's been, the news adored him the first climate king. And so that tells you what they think about what he's doing. And no joke, people think I make this up. I really am not. I found it in an article. He proudly drove one of the first alternative vehicles for a monarch. He drove, I'm not making it up, a vehicle that ran on English wine and cheese. Literally the symbols of decadence. He decided that he was going to save the planet by driving around in a car that did that. But of course, we all know the truth, right? Moments after hearing of the passing of his mother, what did he do? He hopped on a fossil-fueled private jet, and he is shipped around on private helicopters, even though, sources inside the palace say it really bothers him that he's doing that. So to your question, which is exactly the right one, what is he going to do? He is the cheerleader in chief for the climate agenda, right? He has not a lot of years to make a dent in what his legacy is going to be, and he thinks it's going to be this. And you saw a little bit of it when he's meeting with President Biden today. You see that they are organizing people who they claim have trillions of dollars behind them to make this movement go forward. It's fascinating to me that they can wrangle up trillions of dollars of supposedly private investment, but yet Joe Biden still needs, billions of our tax dollars to make it happen. And so you have a ceremonial king and King Charles who is trying to act like he's still an absolute monarch, and you have a President Joe Biden who's also trying to act like a monarch by passing rules and executive orders without going through Congress or without really doing anything with the sign off the American people. And we've seen the results for the past couple of years.
Our dear friend Chris Horner has an expression. He says rent seeking is the world's second oldest profession. And I think these people that you saw suckling up to the king and the president this earlier today were simply there saying, well, if I give a little bit here, I'm going to get a whole lot back later, because the companies that I'm going to, quote, invest in are going to be the only companies still functioning in 50 years. So I will be, remain as wealthy as I am now. So this kind of play acting upper class twit of the year competition going on with the king and the president is dangerous to me, because this gives them the gravitas to say, oh, no, this isn't us. This is private enterprise. But it's private enterprise being cajoled by a monarchy and what is ostensibly become a 4-year reelected monarchy.
Right. And you know what? I'm a fan of private enterprise as much as the next guy, but let's be clear. You're onto the right point of what these folks will probably be asking in the next couple of years. Here you have a U.S. president who is starting his reelection bid. I'm sure he's going to want some of those green dollars going into his campaign coffers. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure these businesses are happy to send it because they know that as Joe Biden is in office, some of that taxpayer money flows to them. The same in the UK, right? You have a monarch who, lives off their family's wealth and the beneficiary of the UK hardworking people. And so they're also hoping probably for a little bit of that payout as well. It's always fascinating to me how you have these, geriatric men and these figurehead fossil fuels themselves telling us this is what you need to do. You need to spend more money and that'll change the weather.
Well, and it won't change the weather. I mean, even when you press them, I think the EPA chief was in Congress 2 or 3 weeks ago and said, this is really more of an investment plan than it is a climate change agenda. I mean, they've grown so arrogant that they're just saying it in Congress because I guess they're so convinced that the Kool-Aid drinkers in their cult have said, nah, that didn't really happen. Anything I hear that speaks out from the dogma is got to be fake news or a conspiracy theory, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting when they get caught saying the truth out loud, right? But I think they almost have to, because folks might not remember, but it was back in 2008 with the first stimulus when then Vice President Joe Biden was put in charge of $90 billion from that stimulus program because he was going to usher in the next era of green investment in the United States. Of course, that didn't happen. Now he wants to do it through the Inflation Reduction Act with a whole lot more money. And so they have to admit they're not getting the results that they want. Americans are not buying the EVs. We're not fans of intermittent energy from wind or solar panels. But you know what? Companies are getting rich, and let's just be honest, countries are getting rich too, and specifically that means China.
Yeah, and that's the part that I think people are forgetting is that we're making people who are horrible polluters very wealthy in doing this. So the double dog hypocrisy on these people is that not only are we not being any cleaner in the United States, but we're rewarding people who are some of the worst polluters on the planet.
And not only that, they are just laughing at those who are just beholden to this agenda with a cult-like personality, right? Because China is bringing on more coal plants every week than we are here in the United States. So what? So that they can deliver us solar panels and windmills, according to Joe Biden's agenda. The U.S. Senate doesn't really agree on a whole lot in a bipartisan fashion anymore. But folks may remember they agreed on trying to stop Chinese-made solar panels from coming to the United States because China had moved them to Vietnam and Malaysia and other countries to avoid tariffs from the United States. And Joe Biden vetoed that bill. I mean, a bipartisan bill to stop the United States from buying so many Chinese-made solar panels, and Joe Biden vetoes it. So you have to ask yourself, when did this stop being about the environment? The answer is a long time ago. And now it's about making rich those who are helping the Biden family.
So let's talk about your book, Sabotage. So I gather from the title, though I haven't been able to peruse it much, some liner notes, that this is, as so many people are looking at it, going, this can't be an accident, can it? So tell us what you found in your book.
Yeah, I just took a look at it's a couple of things. One, I took a look at, in 2020, they brought Joe Biden out as the moderate one, right? He's not a Bernie Sanders, so he's not that leftist. He's the moderate one. But when you look at Joe Biden's history, dating back to, the 1700s, or when he ever first got into the Senate, he has been a radical environmental leftist that whole time. And so we shouldn't have been surprised at the presidency we've got. But the book is essentially some short essays. I like to make it bite sized, but I looked at what Joe Biden has done to the American energy industry, and I thought it's just been such an avalanche of incompetence and, yes, sabotage, that there are so many things that he's done that we forget whenever he does something new, the last three terrible things that he's done. So it is as it happened, kind of a Swiss Army knife of understanding what Joe Biden has done to the American energy industry, and it shows the corresponding gas prices we were all paying at the pump as those things happen. There's definitely a correlation there.
Is it a perfect storm between an industry that was already a bollocks and a guy who has, certainly as the evidence continues to mount, shows no compunction about lining his own family's pockets with government contracts and things like that? Because you've got an industry that's still trying to find its foothold. Obama couldn't resuscitate it. If Obama couldn't resuscitate it, what makes Joe Biden? Well, Joe Biden may not even be concerned with resuscitating it. He just wants to stick some more money in the bank of Hunter. And so, I mean, I think this is like a perfect storm of unfortunate events.
It is. It is folks that are adhered to the green cult, and what they've decided to do is they've looked at the American energy industry and they said those folks generally support my political opponents. So it's using the power of government to go after your political opponents. It's no different than other socialist movements and no different than other communist type movements. When you say we're going to squeeze our political opponents and where they make money, so that way they go out of business and they have less opportunity to fight us in the realms of where we're doing everything. And where Joe Biden is making his moves is in everywhere, right? In his administration, there's no part of that huge bureaucracy of the executive office that Joe Biden is not using to push this radical agenda. And so, and he knows it takes lawsuits to stop that. It takes, time and effort that not only does the American energy industry not have because they are making the energy we all use, but also they're all losing their jobs because of these strangling regulations and actions that Joe Biden has taken. And so it's a nice little 1-2 punch for Joe Biden that he gets to prop up his friends and undermine political people on the other side of the aisle at the same time. And so it really is a move out of, socialist type books.
Well, and then, and I brought this up every time we discuss climate, and we do this frequently here, is that we haven't even begun discussing what happens with the solar cells when they stop functioning, what happens to the batteries in the cars when they have to be thrown away, because these are going to be waste sites that make the mountain we send all of our nuclear waste to seem tame comparatively with all the chemicals and things that are going to be oozing out of these panels. And yet, why does nobody seem to want to discuss that?
That's a great point, because it's not about the environment. If it was about the environment, they'd care about the endangered species they displace with these massive solar and wind fields. They'd care about the bald eagles that they chop up with their wind farms. They'd care about the lack of power that it gives when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing, but they don't care about any of that. What they care about is that their political opponents are weaker and that they are getting paid. Joe Biden was the architect of Solyndra. And if you look at the $500 million that went out in the Solyndra deal alone, you have to realize that everyone won in that deal except the American taxpayer.
Right.
And that's the kind of situation that Joe Biden brings to us. But to your point, which is exactly the right one, I think Joe Biden would respond, well, we're working on recycling efforts here in the United States so that we can recycle those plants. But let's be clear, the metals that go into those are dominated by one country, China. And
Yeah.
China holds a dominance in that area that is bigger than OPEC ever held in oil. And so if we're looking to cede our energy independence to China, that's exactly what you would do, and that's exactly what Joe Biden is doing.
I asked somebody about a week and a half ago about the child labor and the young people that are slave labor on these solar panels and working with all these rare earth minerals. I said, do we have any idea of the health implications on that? You know what their answer was? Hold it. A bunch of Chinese citizens dying young? Oh no, the Chinese Communist Party would never be okay with that. Not at all. This is a country with a horrible record on human rights. Why are we, even talking to them anymore?
I think there would be some that would say, and just devil's advocate here, because you're exactly right, some that would say, well, if we give them a little taste of democracy, look what they're going to do. But I think we've learned, right, over the past decade plus, first of all, this not precious metals, but critical minerals that China has and the dominance in the market that they have over it was not by accident. They planned this 20 plus years ago when one of their leaders said, as the Middle East is to oil, we are going to be to rare earth minerals. And that's exactly what they've done. They've pushed an agenda that requires that these products that are made from only their minerals are then prolific throughout the world. And it makes you wonder, when you see these groups that push for solar, that push for wind, are they really being funded and pushed by the United States? Because if they're putting Americans out of work and beholding and making the Chinese Communist Party stronger at the expense of the environment, mind you, then maybe it's not about the earth. Maybe it's about the agenda of who's making money.
What role, and I go back to, because when I hear things, Larry Behrens is on with us. The new book is called Sabotage. That their agenda all comes down to several different things, and all of the greenhouse gases they seek to eliminate are emanations of human life. And I draw this all the way back to the population bomb, Paul Ehrlich, and there's too many people, and we're all going to have famines because of the population. How much of this is still being driven by a population control zealotry?
Yeah, near 100% of it. And it's interesting that you mentioned Dr. Ehrlich, because, if Dr. Ehrlich was right, I should be dead.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I should have died with the hundreds of millions of other people he was expecting to die from mass starvation in the 70s and 80s. Lo and behold, I'm here. I'm not starving. He was amazingly wrong, but that didn't stop 60 Minutes from putting him front and center last January of saying, oh yeah, we still need to do these things. And so the question is, why are we believing these climate scientists just because they have letters after their name? And because when they are so wrong so often, we have to ask ourselves, are they really basing this in science, or are they really basing their predictions in ways that, yes, enrich them as well? The left would like you to think that someone fighting for the earth is completely 100% altruistic. But when you see that they don't give up the things that they demand we give up, and that they are more than happy to pocket a whole lot of money from a whole lot of different places, then you start to realize what this is all really about.
Well, and also you talked about energy and scarcity earlier on, Larry, and technology is the great equalizer. And if a poor person can start a business with a laptop and an idea, get the product or get his services out there with it, and all of a sudden the ability to power that laptop and run that internet service is gone because of these agendas, this not only is a tangible tax on the poor when our electric bills have to go up, but it becomes almost, to borrow from the president, they're going to put you all back in chains.
This is, make no mistake, and we've witnessed it, right? No one talks about it, but the inflation that we faced over the past year plus is Joe Biden's green tax. Mm-hmm. It is there because he messed with something as foundational as energy in our country. And people wouldn't think that it goes beyond the price of the pump, but it does. Everything that is in my house and probably in your house and in everybody's houses was, developed, transported, and installed probably using diesel fuel. So when that cost of that fuel goes up, up, then we're all paying extra. It's Biden's green tax for inflation. And so it absolutely hurts the poor the most and those who can afford to do it. I mean, we see a bunch of thought pieces coming out of Washington and New York saying it's not that bad, but those are all folks making seven figures. I can tell you, in the middle of the United States, in working families, it is that bad. It is that difficult. And when you have to, almost take out a second mortgage to buy groceries, you have to ask yourself, why is Washington so tone deaf to it? And I think, we see a perfect example of it today. We have the President of the United States, again, jetting off to Europe with John Kerry in tow, because he never is, John Kerry never misses a foreign photo op any chance he gets, to meet with the first climate king, according to the media, when yet he hasn't set foot in East Palestine, Ohio.
No.
And so that tells you the absolute priorities of this president and where it's going. And it's to line the pockets of not only himself, but those who have brought him there and those who will take care of his family for generations to come.
Larry, to tie into the theme of your book, Sabotage, and how this has really been an intentional thing, just 2 weeks ago, at the end of 2 weeks ago, the USDA chief testified to Congress that 40% of the American farmland had been plowed under because the crops failed. And they said in their report that it was because of a fertilizer shortage. Fertilizer, and I didn't know this before this all started, chief ingredient, natural gas. So now we're going to have, and I don't want to use the F word because I do believe we'll find food, but we're going to have food shortages because we cut off our own natural gas nose to spite our face.
Yeah, absolutely. And sadly, the first symptom is expensive, right? It becomes really prohibitive expensive. And then the next part is, you're exactly right, it turns into scarcity. But if you want to look at fertilizer, which is another target, right, of eco-leftists, because again, you have to look at it from their point of view. If they are trying to only go after their political enemies, then what do? They go after the oil and natural gas industry by terrible regulations and say you pollute and you make the world a more terrible place, so we're going to put you out of business. And the agricultural community is another community that generally doesn't support their push. And so it's actually, in the book where I talk about this happened in Sri Lanka, this is happening in the Netherlands, where they went after the fertilizer just because they said, oh, that is an element that hurts the climate, so we're going to take that off the table. Well, that's like saying to a scuba diver, oxygen is an element that hurts the environment, so we're going to take it off the table. It kills their industry. It absolutely kills it. And in Sri Lanka, it led to massive revolt. I think, the president there had to almost go in exile. And we've seen what's going on in the Netherlands with it. And it's no surprise that it's happening here in the United States, where they get to tell you, we're not trying to destroy your industry. We're just going to outlaw this one critical element of your industry, when they full well know that that's going to kill it. And so as Americans look around and they see, where the tentacles of the green agenda is reaching into, and now it's coming into their homes, right, with their gas stoves and demanding that they drive EVs, they start to realize that it has nothing to do with the environment. It has everything to do with money and control.
So I'm hopeful, Larry, both because of your book, but I grew up in New York City, and when I heard that a classmate of mine from Bayside High School, Mayor Adams, announced that the city was going to heavily tax pizza ovens.
Sure.
And a guy started throwing pizzas at City Hall. I said, maybe they pushed too far. What do you think? You think going after New Yorkers' pizza, or have all the pizza-loving New Yorkers left for Florida anyway?
I think they pushed it too far 5 pushes ago. And so I was glad to see that as well. But let me just put it with a word of warning. The typical pattern of the eco-left, and I'm sorry, and this will enrage some people, but the best study of it is to look at the communist playbook. Is they float these lead balloons that are terrible, and the idea is widely criticized, and even they'll disavow, oh no, that's not us, like they did with the gas stoves. And then 2 or 3 months later, you see that kind of once we've gotten used to the idea, these things start disappearing. And you see the Biden administration at first said, oh no, not on gas stoves, but now lo and behold, they were coming after gas stoves. With the pizza ovens, you have to ask yourself, why are they coming specifically after our way of life and things that we love? Again, It's about control. And so, yes, we can and we should push back, but you have to remain constantly vigilant because what they lose today, they'll try to go and open up two different fronts on something else tomorrow.
Right, and just like Michael Bloomberg said with the sodas, do you really need a slice of pizza? And that's the attitude of these hubris-filled leftists that want to dictate to you how to live. Larry, what's the best way for people to get Sabotage? Is it Amazon? Have they left it up there, or are they throttling
Amazon has not put it down as of right now. And so I'd love for them to go to Amazon and check it out. And so thankful to you for talking with me. What a great discussion.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And stay warm. Keep the air conditioning on while you can. And we'll talk to you again very soon.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
And thank you all for joining us this afternoon here on the Afternoon Constitutional. Again, please support our work at govoversight.org. And you can find out more about our programs, read the stuff that we're digging into. Remember, our favorite four-letter word is FOIA. Until tomorrow at 3, so long, and thanks for all the fish.